Hey everyone, I'm Mike Shikashio. Thanks for joining me for part 2 of this series on dog-to-dog aggression. I'm going to go through a couple case studies here, and I'm going to show you how I work with the dogs from kind of start to finish, and I've got a new case to show for this particular session, so let's jump right in here. So this first case is on Kismet and Maya. They're a couple of female dogs. You can see that Kismet is a 2-year-old female spayed Border Collie mix. Maya is a 6-year-old female spayed Lab Weimaraner mix. And the clients were Carrie and Joe. They didn't have any children, so they lived by themselves with the 2 dogs. So here's a little bit on the conflict history. So if we can go through these, you're going to see some common themes as why they're fighting. And we talked about common issues that can occur between 2 dogs in the home in the previous session. So one of them was when Kismet was chewing on a bone in the living room and Maya approached. So very common scenario where one dog has a resource and the other dog approaches. The second one was Kismet was resting in between a wall and a couch, sort of a tight space, and that's when Maya approached. And then the third incident was when Kismet and Maya were let out into their backyard after the clients got home from a long vacation. And we can assume that there's a lot of stress that's happening there, possibly arousal, possibly frustration, and possibly competition over the owner's attention. So multiple factors involved in that third incident. Now here's the severity in this case. The last 2 fights resulted in level 3 and level 4 bites to Maya, her face and front legs, which resulted in needing emergency veterinary care. So high-level bites, damaging bites, which if we looked at the prognosis, is not always best for a positive outcome. But we'll get more into that in this case. All of the conflicts occurred in the 4 months prior to my initial consult. So coming into the case, all of these fights had happened just several months before, with about a month in between each incident. So here's some additional information about these 2. They did get along before the second fight, so they enjoyed playing with each other. But of course, after a significant fight, many dogs will stop socializing, or one dog will be very afraid of the other. They also enjoyed off-leash hikes. No history of conflicts on the hikes either. And Maya was also described as often anxious. That was in the owner's words. Both dogs were healthy other than the injury sustained by Maya, so no underlying health issues sort of fueling the behavior in this particular case. Kismet had a past history of training with a certified dog behavior consultant as well. She had some dog-to-human aggression issues, which were mostly resolved to the point of people being able to come to the home. So that was so the clients had some behavior change strategy history, meaning they grasped the concepts of training. And you'll see they're very committed clients, and they have the resources available in order to move forward in this case. So I kind of covered this history and prognosis, and you can kind of think about this. Maybe it's your own dogs that are fighting, or you're working with clients' dogs, and you want to know about the potential outcomes. And so I always discuss a prognosis with my clients that's going to help them sort of objectively take a step back and say, is this going to be something I can continue working with? Is it going to be just a management scenario? Is this something that it's not even safe to keep one of the dogs? Maybe I can make everything work out. So it all depends on a lot of these variables. And so what I do is kind of go through these aspects with clients. And you can see the first thing there is the bite levels. So in this case, we had severe bites, levels 3 and 4. That's on the Kara-Shannon bite scale, which is deep puncture wounds. And that's going to reduce the likelihood for a positive prognosis in many cases because the risk of injury is very high. So we have to be very, very careful. The clients have to be able to really carry forth good management in those cases. Predictability, generally pretty predictable in this case. Resources, attention of the owners, and then we know stress stacking can possibly play a role. Tight spaces is also another issue, but generally a little more predictable than 2 dogs just trying to go after each other as soon as they see each other. You have a frequency and variety of conflicts, also in the more positive category because we've had 3 fights. Although they've been severe, it hasn't been a long history of conflict. So it's a different type of case than dogs that have been fighting for 7 years in the home. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a positive or a negative outcome. Sometimes the conflicts are very low levels. You've had 20 fights in 2 years, but they're always resulting in no injuries. And the predictability is there, and it's very obvious why the dogs are fighting. That can present for actually a positive prognosis. The social history is good in this case, and the previous dynamic between the dogs all positive because they used to get along and play well together. Medical history is also positive in this case because there's no underlying medical issues going on that we need to address. You'll see the sex pairing is the most difficult part of this case. Two females, different ages, and about the same size dogs. So we have a little less risk with the size difference because they're around the same size. And the everything else is generally more for a positive pairing, except for the female-female dynamic, which is often going to be more difficult in your dog-dog aggression cases. Manageability is also good in this case because they had a large home, 2 floors, and they were perfectly capable of separating the dogs, one on each floor for the time being while we were working through this case. The intensity was high in this case because the fights or the attack from Kismet, or attacks, I should say, were pretty intense. And when we're talking to clients, or if it's your own dogs, we have to consider that because the intensity and hearing that conflict and the sound of a dog fight can be very traumatic for some. And it's important to take that into consideration because it can impact our behavior change plans. It can impact meaning the client may not want to take any risks. Maybe they're just going to be long-term management solutions. So we do want to assess for how the clients are feeling about those conflicts. Training history is good also in this case. There's been some background in training, so it's going to make my job easier anytime a client has some background and training that I would typically use, of course. So not having to, for instance, teach like a marker signal or, some foundational skills. It's going to make things easier in your cases if there's some baseline training being done. I mentioned the resources. Again, they had the time and all of the other aspects that we need for commitment in a case. Risk assessment. Now, this is, again, the one significant factor that was pointing towards a negative prognosis is the history of the injuries. And so much higher risk for Maya, the brown dog you see here. And that is something to consider in all of your cases. Is it too risky for the other animal or person in the home, depending on what kind of case it is? You'll see the clients are very committed in this case, so the client participation is there. And they were both willing to work through these issues. So both clients were very committed, both were communicating with each other. They were on the same page about management and realistic expectations. So they had a pretty full emotional bank account, or meaning how much they had left in their own tanks to continue moving forward. So you can see in the overall prognosis, at first, you might say, that's some severe injuries, and that's a very risky case, and it is. But many of the other factors in the prognosis point towards a positive outcome. So when I have that in a situation, there may be 1 or 2 factors that are potentially very negative, but it can often be balanced out by all of the other positives in the case. Good management, good commitment from the clients, and the variables of the dogs actually getting along before. We start to add those things up. It can help to, create a picture for us that is going to allow us to determine, is this realistic to keep these dogs together or is it not? So that was the prognosis in this case. I moved on to the recommendations. So I talked to the clients about why their dogs were fighting over resources and some of the factors that can fuel that behavior, like stress, arousal, and tight spaces. But the recommendations you can see are very simple and straightforward. So I suggested a Baskerville muzzle for Kismet, so we want that for safety. We absolutely have to have a layer of safety in place when we're doing the training sessions or when the dogs are together when we first start out. So generally the dogs are completely separated, and then we'll get the dogs back together for maybe a minute or two in a controlled and strategic way. That way we're setting up that training scenario, and then the dogs we put away for the rest of the day, individually. And then of course they would get their own enrichment and exercise individually. But each day and each session, with each success, you're going to add more time, more duration, possibly more sessions during that day. But of course you need to have safety in play. And a Baskerville muzzles or some type of muzzle is going to prevent injuries while you're seeing if everything's actually working. You also need to teach your clients, or if it's your own dogs, you've got to learn how to break up a dog fight safely, because many injuries occur to humans when they reach in and try to break up a dog fight. So different topic for another day, but do learn some skills on how to break up a dog fight without getting your hands anywhere near the dogs. Body language is another aspect you want to focus on in your aggression cases for dog to dog, especially because you have to know how to intervene and when to intervene. Real quick tip on that is most of us, when we see dogs posturing, growling, freezing or stiffening up near each other and we sense something's about to happen, our natural instinct is to jump in and be like, no, and grab a collar or maybe pull the dog's way or yell or scream. Natural human response, totally understandable. However, we have to be careful because that can actually trigger the fight if we move towards the dog. So I teach clients if they see something that's not a fight but is potential for problems, I ask them, call the dogs away from the spot. Move away from the dogs and just in a cheery tone, hey guys, over here, there's something fun happening over here and you guys are missing it. That can often reduce the tension in that moment. And then, of course, you want to figure out why they were having that tension and then modify the environment, whether it's pulling resources out of the picture or not giving the dogs access to that space. And then, of course, separating the dogs for that time being so you can kind of problem solve what's happening there. So next step, of course, is managing that environment, managing the resources that are involved. So the bones, the owners, we'd have to talk, I'll talk more about them in a minute. So anything that could be potentially presented as a resource of value for the dogs, we want to, of course, manage. And I recommended a vet consult for Maya, given the description of anxious behavior or being anxious a lot was what their response was. So I had them consult with a veterinarian for potential behavior meds to help her with that. And you also, by the way, whenever you have two dogs fighting and you're hearing that anxiety picture or maybe a fear picture, you want to really make sure how much does it have to do with the other dog? Is it a situation in which that other dog is so threatening to the sort of victim dog like Maya that it's impacting their welfare? Because it's not always fair to keep the other dog in the home that's going to significantly deteriorate the behavior or well-being of the other dog in the home. So you're going to want to assess for that. And it's not to say you can't continue on that case. You just want to be very aware of it and make adjustments to ensure that other dog in the home is feeling safe in their environment. And we take steps to ensure that. So medication for a dog like Maya. I didn't suspect that it was, I'm sure that she wasn't having a good time living with Hannibal Lecter in the same home. However, I do suspect that there was it wasn't just solely related on Kismet's, the attacks from Kismet. And much of that evidence was because there was reports of anxiety before they started fighting as well. So the behavior change strategy here, you're going to see it's going to be very similar to what I talked about in the previous session for this series. We're going to do stationed reintroductions. And what that looks like is you teach the dogs, okay, a certain location to go to, whether it's a mat or a bed, or even if it's just an area we point to. That stationary behavior just makes it a lot easier for the training, and you'll see it in action in just a little bit. And so you do that at a distance at first, and we're going to teach the differential reinforcement of alternative behavior strategy here, which is the DRA. And that is essentially, teach the dog what we want them to do in the context in which the aggression has happened in the past. So for Maya, or Kismet rather, we have options of saying, I'd like you to do this instead of attacking your sister next time there's a bone around or you see your owners giving Maya attention. No need to compete over that. And in fact, it's gonna pay off way better for you if you display this alternative desirable behavior. So look at Maya. Stay stationed, go find a station, do something else, and I'll reinforce you for that behavior. That's going to pay off much better than trying to compete over those resources. So you start at a distance, and then you gradually decrease distance, and you vary the locations as well, and then you, of course, add in the situations in which the fights happen. So you keep it very simple, very easy for the owners, very easy for the dogs at first. And then as you go along, you're going to start to build your criteria where you're adding in those resources, you're decreasing distance, you're making it more random. And then, of course, you can do relationship repair activities such as play. If the dogs have a history of playing in certain contexts and there's no history of fighting in those contexts, I often recommend let's let them play with safety, of course, muzzle still on. For those moments, but it can be very helpful to repair the relationship. So then we go into what's called normal interactions, so much more organic behavior. We're just looking to see how the dogs get along in a certain space. So you might start out very structured. You might say, okay, you guys are going to hang out with us while we watch TV for a couple hours in the evening. You'll both be stationed for those first, few weeks that we're doing this, and then we'll give you a little bit more freedom of movement. It's meaning the dogs are going to be moving around more, and then you start to add in more situations in the context in which there was likelihood for fighting before. So gradual reintroduction into those contexts. Okay, here's the first video. This is me working with Kismet. You'll see Maya is. Let me see if I get my cursor here. Lost my cursor. Well, you see Maya there in the distance. There it is. And Kismet's here, and I'm working with her, just marking and reinforcing for noticing Maya getting anything, any resource, any attention from the owner, any treats. If she notices that and stays put, just look, and then I'm going to mark and reinforce that. So don't go over there. Don't try to attack. Don't do anything else that we would deem as aggressive behavior. Just stay put, and that'll pay off for you. So what is also happening there is classical counter conditioning, where Kismet starts to learn that when Maya gets something, she's about to get something. So it predicts that she's about to get a reinforcer when Maya gets something. And that's important. That order of events has to be clear, or else it's not going to really stick the way we want it to. We basically want Kismet saying, please give Maya something, because that's going to pay off for me. So yeah, give her treats. Yeah, keep giving her treats, because every time you do, that means I'm about to get something. So it's very much a cooperative exercise in a sense. And of course, Maya just gets the benefits of straight classical counter conditioning, where it's, okay, here comes the axe murderer. Now I'm going to get food or something. And we want to make sure she's feeling safe as well. So you can see both dogs are stationed, meaning that we've asked them to remain in one location. And it's really important, if you're using stationing, it's important to keep enough distance where the dogs are feeling safe about the situation or they exercise. Because if we ask a dog to station in a moment that they're not feeling safe, we're artificially removing that option to move away from something that's not safe. And that can actually backfire on you in the long term. So always evaluate, is the dog feeling comfortable? And the way to do that is through their behavior and their body language. It's going to tell you very clearly when the dog is comfortable or not. So here's the male owner working with Kismet. Same exact exercise. And you can see we're starting at probably about 15 feet distance, maybe 20 feet in between the dogs. You don't need a lot of space in some of your cases. I'm sure many of you have dogs, though, or have worked with dogs. You need 500 yards between the dogs, but that's okay. Always start at a distance that the dogs are going to be comfortable, because they're going to notice each other in the environment. That's almost a guarantee. And so they're going to give you that behavior of noticing the other dog. You don't have to train for that. They're going to do it anyways. We just mark and reinforce the dog when they give us that behavior. And then they start throwing that behavior at you. All right, here we are in the dining room area, different locations. So this is something you want to do, mix and match where the dogs are located, mix and match who's working with the dogs, and same scenario though, marking and reinforcing. So the female client is working with Kismet there, and she is marking and reinforcing Maya for noticing Maya getting anything. You can see that I add in intensity. So remember, the three variables in controlling your sessions are distance, how far the dogs are from each other, the duration, how long the session is, and the intensity of what you're doing. So getting a dog more excited, having her like just, getting her kind of riled up and excited about something is adding intensity. So make sure that you're watching for that. You don't want to add so much intensity that the other dog fails or goes over threshold. All right, so I always talk about that 4 hours of separation, and you'll see that happen in this case. And the reason why is stuff like this can happen if you do not have a 4 hours on a clock in between the dogs, and you're giving out a resource. So this is a perfect video example of that.
망고 힐을 준다. 망고. 힐을 준다. 힐을 준다.
Now, obviously, these dogs have probably less of an issue than Kismet and Maya. However, you can see the problem when you are not giving the dog some space from each other. And it also is not allowing you to take control of that situation if you need to. So let's say one dog kind of leans over and starts growling. The other dog's like, you're not doing that to me. Next thing you know, you're going to have a fight because the dogs are so close to each other. So making sure that humans in the middle and the dogs are at 9 and 3 or 10 and 2, that there's plenty of separation in between them. And when you think about it, all you're doing is really just stationing the dogs where you're the center of the universe and they're the little planets sort of revolving around you, but they are always in the same spots. And if you make that consistent, what will happen is the dogs will actually start to look for those locations around you anytime a resource is available. So whether it's treats or you coming home and giving the dogs attention, or you sitting on the couch and the dogs each taking a side, and they consistently keep taking those same locations, it creates a lot of predictability for the dogs. It removes a lot of the anxiety because they're not worried about, oh, wait, where do I go? Or do I have to kind of worry about the other one pushing into my space? It's the same thing as like when we ask for a heel. Right? So dog heel, you say heel, and where does the dog go? To your left side if you're traditionally teaching heel. When you think about it, that's just a station next to the handler in relation to where they're standing and how they're standing. So you can teach the dog the same thing. Anytime I've got a treat, you guys are always going to go to 10 and 2 on the clock, or 9 and 3. If you have multiple dogs, it might be 10, 2, and 6. Okay, so you'll see, again, there's that nice 4 hours of separation, or really 6 hours in this, or almost 8 hours here, in which they're separated. And you'll see that Kismet does sort of weight shift forward towards Maya, and so the client's able to get in between them. So you can picture if they were next to each other, that wouldn't have been able to happen. Now, the other thing happening in this video is Kismet is being marked for noticing Maya getting any kind of attention or a resource. And it's really important the clients understand that that's what's happening, because if not, the casual observer is going to think, oh, you're just giving one treat, just one treat back and forth to the dogs. But that is not what's happening. We're looking to make sure Kismet notices Maya getting something. Now you can see one little training error there where the client reinforced the behavior right after she did that weight shift forward, but those are the things you can coach them through later on or during the session to adjust so that they can, again, concentrate on making sure we're reinforcing her for noticing the other dog getting something of value. Okay, so this was the progress report at 2 months. There was an injury to the male owner, so the client was outside cutting trees down in his yard, and he got hit in the head with one of the branches, unfortunately. So they took him out of their training for a couple of months, but the female client kept working diligently on that. Maya was placed on fluoxetine or Prozac for her anxiety issues, and that seemed to help significantly. And I mentioned, again, the wife was very good about training in this case, continued working with both dogs, but was kind of getting stuck at a certain point because I wasn't able to come back and give them more coaching at the time during that. So she had spent a couple good 2-3 months working on this, teaching Kismet how to station and getting the dogs in the same room together, but not necessarily letting them completely interact at that point. So I went back at that point and checked to see what their progress was like, and you'll see that Kismet is doing extremely well. So the wife called me back. She's like, Mike, I've been working on things. Husband's getting better now, so we'd like you to come back. I'm like, okay, so have you tried having the dogs together at all? They're like, no, we've been separating them completely. We're a little bit concerned about doing it ourselves. So can you come back and see what happens? So I did. And this was my first assessment or reassessment, where you'll start seeing that the work has been done. They've been doing a beautiful job because Kismet actually chooses to station when she sees the environmental cue of Maya getting attention. So Maya getting attention from me or the male owner, you'll see, becomes the cue. Maya's learned that, or Kismet's learned that, okay, when she gets attention, if I go station somewhere, I'll get paid off. And you'll see her offer that behavior several times in this video. We'll just let them be for a little bit here. I just want to see, kind of get the natural, especially when there's something in the environment that they might find of value, like treat guy, and how resources play a role. All right. So you can see when Maya goes over to get attention from the male owner, Kismet's like, I know what to do here. I'm going to go find a station. And that's what we call a cold trial. That means you haven't warmed up the dogs with any kind of food or training indications that you're training or setting up a training scenario. You just go in and see what happens. So there's not even, we're missing opportunities to reinforce Kismet there, which is okay. You start to move on to more of a random scheduled reinforcement as you go along in these cases. But you can see that the clients have done a wonderful job in this case, in those contexts in which resources are presented, that she's learned a whole new set of skills. So we also, of course, wanted to build on that success. So I wanted to see how they interacted again in the backyard. So this is their first little play session, or chase and play session.
Nice. Good. Good. Good.
So the nice thing about play, as many of you have probably seen Dr. Amy Cook's work, is that it is a great barometer to tell you if things are actually okay, because dogs aren't going to play and be fearful or concerned about something in that manner in their environment. So it's very difficult to be playful or feel playful if you're going to be threatened by something. So when I see two dogs playing or starting to engage in that, a little bit of chase and kind of follow me with the stick kind of play, that's a good sign saying that there's a relationship building happening there, or repair, we can call it. And so I encourage them to continue doing that with safety, of course. So for the first few months after this, and depending on the case, it may be for many years in some cases where you need to really be safe with the muzzle on, I encourage them, okay, let's get those play sessions back going again. We'll get the supervised, of course. And hikes, off-leash hikes is something they can do. You can see the woods in the backyard there. Plenty of off-leash hiking spaces in which they did that, and the dogs did incredibly well as well. So they haven't had any fights since that last session. That was way back in 2017 now. I can't believe it's been that long. Kismet still continues to wear the muzzle when they are in contexts of not supervising the dogs together. When you have a bite level history that severe, it's best just to be extra cautious. So if they are separated in the home, obviously no muzzle is needed. In play context and outdoor hiking, I felt it was comfortable saying no muzzle is needed there. But inside the home, when there's a potential for a resource and the dogs are hanging out together, and nobody's really paying attention to the situation, then the muzzle should be on for safety. So, and then Maya was also making some wonderful improvements with her anxiety, and the meds, I think, were very helpful in that regard.